Hello and welcome to PerchPeek Pods, the only place where you get long-form interviews with some of the world's best global mobility leaders. It's been such an awesome start to the podcast. We've had so many great guests already, but I'm especially excited about this week's because today we have Viv Mott, global mobility leader at ERM. But to say global mobility leader at ERM is an understatement because you've done a hell of a lot through your career in global mobility, Viv. Um, Introduce yourself to the community and we can dig into all your experience from there.
Okay, great. Well, that's a huge intro. Thank you.
I know. Yeah, a lot to live up to, Viv. The community is expecting big things.
So I've been in global mobility now in my 38th year, which is a little bit sad, really.
I know.
And enjoyed every single year of it. I started off in, but for most of my career, I was in financial services. So I started off at Citi, which was a very good training ground for global mobility. We had a great policy team based in New York. I was the regional lead for EMEA, and it was excellent to sort of like be the platform to sort of leapfrog me into mobility, because none of us set out to be a global mobility sort of expert, which a lot of people mention. And then I changed roles and ended up working for Barclays, for RBS, ABN AMRO, and then more recently joined Aviva, which was still sort of financial services, but a few rungs down the ladder, really. And then joined ERM 3.5 years ago. I was going to retire, but this job came up and it was a part-time role. And I was informed that when I went for the interview, we only had 30 moves a year, so I could work part-time.
Nice.
That was during the pandemic. Within 6 weeks of joining ERM, after I'd introduced myself to all the regional HR directors, I was moving 42 families within 6 weeks. So it wasn't quite the part-time.
Oh, wow.
It was led to believe, but
Okay.
Right. I love the operational side of it. So
Good. Well, we're going to go off script immediately. How did that happen? How did they just not know that these families were moving? Did you tell families they needed to move? What happened?
So ERM didn't have a global mobility person for 24 months before I joined them. So I think what was happening, a lot of the moves went under the radar.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of sorting out to do. When we got to the position to look at the bonus share, because we split bonus payments at ERM, depending on where the individual is. When I run a report from Workday, we had about 60 moves that mobility never knew about. But then there wasn't anybody doing GM. It was just various people putting a finger in the pie and trying to help out when they could. So there was no centralised person managing it. So it was a lot of sorting out when I first joined them. And I think, reaching out to the regional HR directors, they were like, oh, great, we've got somebody. So here we are, here it all is, which was great because that's what I enjoy doing.
That's awesome. Many more questions on this. Firstly, those hidden, sneaky black box moves that don't funnel through mobility, I feel a lot of people have suffered with that in their career. I wanted to dig in. You mentioned you did that Workday report on bonuses as this sort of the function to discover who had maybe moved.
Yeah.
Did you have permissions to run that report yourself? How did you know to do that?
So most large corporates, whatever system you use, whether it's PeopleSoft or Workday, you have like an HRIS team and they sort of manage the system. So you have got the ability to pull reports yourself, and obviously being in HR, you've got the ability to pull reports on anything you wish from the system. But no, I mean, we've got a Workday team at ERM, so I just went to the Workday team and asked them to run me a report. And it's something we still do, because even though we keep a database of who we're moving ERM cross-border, we don't necessarily capture everybody. If somebody moves, they haven't got any benefits being provided to them for the relocation, there's no reason for them to come to mobility. So we still, as a control, we still run a report at the end of each bonus year. And we always pick up at least 20 people who've moved who haven't actually been referred to mobility to support them with the move because of having zero benefits.
Yeah. And maybe they don't even know the mobility team exists still, if that hasn't. I wanted to dig in as well. You mentioned you were operating again, back where so many of us began helping people with the actual operations of the move. were there prescribed benefits? What were you doing to support those 42 families part-time? How are we trying to help?
So very different actually for each family that I was moving. Even though we have the formalised policies here at ERM, we have a short-term assignment policy, a long-term assignment policy, a permanent moves policy. We do struggle to get approval from the business to pay for the relocation costs of the move. Even if it's somebody who has, there's an open position, say in Singapore, and someone from the UK has applied for it, they've got the strengths and the criteria for the role. So that very much, in my mindset, is an employer-related move. We are saying to the person, yes, we want you, but then you start talking to the business about paying for, shipment of household goods, paying for a housing search, paying for temporary living, and they're like, oh no, we haven't agreed to these costs. This individual wants to come here. No, you've actually offered the move. And again at ERM, a lot of our moves are employee requested. So I would say 80% of our moves each year are where the individual put their hand up. They say, look, I want to move from the UK to Spain. My family have moved there, or I'm, in a relationship with somebody. And if it's a global role that they're performing or a role that they can perform in Spain, then we're very accommodating. But then, of course, you have the issue with the fact that they need working rights. There's a cost associated to it. So it can be very challenging when the majority of your moves are employee related.
Yes.
Or employee initiated, rather.
Yeah, it's definitely a different kettle of fish than businesses strictly asking you, and I imagine very different from where you began at Citi and learned there. So tell us actually on that, 38 years of doing global mobility, Viv, that is incredible. What are the biggest changes you've seen?
God, cost has always been an issue, but when you work in financial services, really, when you hear about a move, business just say, look, I want them here as quickly as possible. I don't care what it costs, just do it. And when I was first introduced to mobility at Citi, a very structured program, for the exception process was very well documented. You couldn't get anything through unless, you had the various approval levels for exceptions. But it was in the days when if someone was on 200,000 a year, their actual net income was more than their gross income of 200,000 because they were getting foreign assignment premiums.
Yeah.
We were paying a 15% tax-free allowance for a foreign assignment premium. Cost of living, which I know is relative to what country you're working in and what the goods and services cost. But I would say the majority of our long-term assignees were actually earning a higher net salary than their gross salary in those days. And benefits, we used to, at Citibank, provide, if a Brit was leaving the UK and they're going to New York for 2 years, we would give them a rental guarantee income on their property if they chose to rent it out. So whether it was rented or not.
Wow.
I would go out and get 3 estate agents to provide me with the market value of what the rent would be. I would set a rental guarantee at, say, an average of those 3 quotes, let's say £4,000 a month. And we would pay that to the individual, and then it would be my responsibility to try and get tenants in the property. Those benefits aren't available now.
They're not.
Yeah,
it's so crazy. It's and I think it's people who don't work in financial services or haven't been in the industry for a while, you just don't see that anymore. It's sort of similar to the decline of US home sales. It's the sort of really rich, expensive benefits are just declining, and the sort of perspective, etc. Okay, so decline in benefits. What else have you seen change?
I just think the whole GM landscape is so different now, and especially post-pandemic. Before the pandemic, global mobility were moving people cross-border per se, and that was it. Whereas post-pandemic, we're talking about virtual assignments, we're talking about probably we spend most of our time within my team looking at cross-border remote working.
Yeah.
We probably spend at least 20 to 30% of our time each week managing issues, questions, problems about cross-border working, reviewing cross-border working requests. And really when, we're moving very few long-term assignees now.
Yeah.
A lot of sort of partners want to work virtually or remotely. They want to stay in their home country and just have regular business trips to the host market.
Yeah.
And because of Teams and Zoom and all the other facilities available now, it's more viable. You know, when I first started in mobility, we didn't have Teams, we didn't have Zoom.
Exactly.
You had the good old landline on the desk, and that was it.
Exactly. So there's more. I mean, you mentioned two great ones: fully virtual assignments, where they might only do cross-border, remote. Want to go back to that? Definitely, sort of increasing scope of some types of assignment and decreasing long-term assignments. What hasn't changed? You know, what's the same as it was, or what's still important to be good in this industry?
So for me, it's important to have the relationship with the people that you're moving. It's important to have that communication link up and running with them. It's important that you have vendors who are professional and ethical and support them in that move.
Yeah.
You know, moving cross-border, even moving yourself when you're moving house. You know, I personally done that sort of 2.5 years ago. And even though I've been moving people internationally for 38 years, I totally underestimated. I thought it would be a breeze for me.
Yeah.
In my previous house for 34 years, I was only moving 20 miles away. Thought it'd be great. You know, I can do this standing on my head. My God, it was the most stressful time of my life. So I tend to give more support, have more phone calls with the people that I'm moving, making sure that, you know, whatever question they want to ask me, however silly it seems, please ask. Don't just sit there and worry about something.
Yeah. I love that. The sort of, whilst the tools might have changed and the touch, the stress of moving, it's unbelievable. And it's so easy to forget when you're helping people every day and ... But going through it yourself sounds like it was a reminder of the stress involved.
And it's probably easier now from the perspective that you've got more technology available to you. You've got more apps, you've got more information on the internet. But that also can, I think, go against someone who's moving, because you're providing them with information through your vendors or through your global mobility team, and they're finding something different on the internet that's contradicting what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, hang on, if you want a property in central Paris, in this particular road, it really will cost you over the budget that we're providing to you.
Yeah. Exactly. And and then there's almost a massive information, and you can always find the one person that moved that had like cheap or whatever, and that can be challenging. One of the things I think you touched on there, I wanted to dig into is those vendor relationships. I know you are sort of amazing at handling your vendors, and you mentioned having to find ethical and professional ones. What are your tips for the community when trying to select good vendors to work with? What have you seen work well?
So for me, it's obviously the company that you're using has to have a good reputation in the marketplace.
Yeah.
And I've got a huge GM network because I've been in the industry for so long.
Yeah.
So I know who I would want to use, and I know who I would not touch with a barge pole. So when I was going to retire, when I left Aviva 3.5 years ago, and somebody called me about this job at ERM, when I found out the global relocation vendor they were using, that was part and parcel of my decision to continue to work in mobility, because I knew that my families that I'm moving would be 110% supported with their moves.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was a company that I would never have wanted to utilise, I probably would be retired now.
Good. I love that. So good quality vendors are keeping you in the game, Viv. That's amazing. That's
and the team at the vendor company has to be the right team.
Yeah.
It has to understand the culture and the needs of the company that you work for. And all the vendors that I've used, sometimes I've had to change people on that team because they haven't got the right strengths. You know, they're not necessarily proactive. As much as you try and talk to them about the culture of who we are, they don't get it. So occasionally I've had to change, but luckily since I've been at ERM, that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that, that sort of strength of relationship, using your network I want to go back to, and also not being afraid. We are in a people industry at the end of the day. Those relationships, both between vendors and with relocating employees, are important. If someone on the vendor side isn't, you know, working out, ask them if there's someone else that can roll in. I love that as an idea. It's sort of, often it might just be a bit of a clash for whatever reason, and I love that. Talk to me about your GM network. I'm always very impressed that, and even just in preparation for this call, so many people had wonderful things to say about you. How have you tried to sort of build and maintain that network? Because it's not an easy thing to do.
So initially, when I first worked at Citi, and I worked in the foreign staff department, because mobility and global were words that you use then. We set up Citibank and Merrill Lynch at that point in time. And I'm going back to the late 80s here.
Yeah.
So we decided to set up a forum for global mobility managers, or global mobility heads, foreign staff heads, whatever you wanted to call it then.
Yeah.
Like a banking forum. So we ended up with about 32 banks on this network.
Wow.
So we would meet every 3 or 4 months, and we'd have an alphabetical list of all the banks, and each bank would in turn host the Global Mobility Forum. And we had a set agenda for the forum. We'd ask all the other banks, what do you want to discuss at this forum? Whatever bank hosted it, you'd lay on lunch, and then you'd have drinks afterwards if you were able to. And I think that's still going now. And then when I moved out of the banking forum and joined Aviva, I set up one for insurance companies. So AXA, Allianz, Aviva, Generali. We only had about 6 companies, but it was great because they were all those companies were headquartered in Europe. So I managed to travel to sort of Germany with Allianz, and Paris with AXA. So it was great. And within your companies, when you're a global mobility team or a global mobility person, you haven't got that expertise, that knowledge internally.
Yeah.
You need to reach out to your peers in the industry to talk about the challenges you're having, because it's likely they've had those challenges and they can share how they will resolve with you. So it's a great network. And you've now got, the Expat Academy, you've got the FBM, you've got the HR advisor, you've got a wealth of...
Yeah, exactly. And it is, I love that so much, that you set up or help set up your own industry network initially that's still going. And I think that is testament to how valuable those networks are, and those small teams that you mentioned. There's not a 50-person GM team you can ask about advice. And I think the other thing is there's always new problems coming up.
Yeah,
Brexit,
absolutely.
tax changes, etc. So
and Brexit was a prime example.
Yes.
A different issue every day, displaced workers, and looking at tax treaties and how much is it going to cost us? How do we need to be compliant?
Yes.
It just brought a completely different landscape onto global mobility and our day-to-day job and what we were used to doing versus what we do now. Yeah,
let's go to Brexit then. I know in the preparation for this quote, you had some an interesting experience of Brexit and the impact for your role at Aviva. Cast us back to that fateful time when Brexit was happening and what happened.
So when I woke up on that fateful morning and heard the news on the radio that we were coming out of the EU, I'm like, I think that was on the Friday, if I remember. So on the Monday, I got into work. I phoned the Workday team and said, can I have a report from Workday of all the nationalities, about 17,500 UK contracts employees? And they just laughed at me. And they said, well, you can, but if you've got 1,000 nationalities on there, you'll be lucky.
Yeah.
So I said, but surely that's a mandatory field. And it wasn't a mandatory field on Workdays, but I needed to know where EU nationals were in the UK. So I spoke to my boss then, who was the head of Total Reward, and said, look, we need to reach out to one of our UK contracts employees, and we need to do like a right to work check of sorts. We need to identify what nationalities they are, and we need to get Workday outdated because we're going to need this information going forward. So after a lot of sort of different submissions to various, ex-coms, etc., for approval for this, we got the budget to go and visit all of our 15 branch offices in the UK. So I had a team of about 6 people then. Wow. So I would send them off to Edinburgh and to Sheffield, and they would send emails to all of that group of people working in that city. And we'd have like a workshop and we'd get them to bring their passports in. And when I left Aviva, I think out of the 17,500, after about a year and a half, we had something like 69 delinquents. But we did find a couple of illegal workers through that process. And we also found somebody with a fraudulent passport. So it was a very interesting time.
That is incredible. That is incredible. So many aspects. Firstly, that's pretty amazing that you went from 1,000 to almost full coverage in that period. When your team were meeting people in person at these regional offices, like, what was their experience like? Were they trying to sort of meet with people? What was that? What were they actually doing?
So generally, two of the particular cities they went into, and Norwich is one of them, we had two big call centres. So going into the call centres, it was very difficult because, you had to request to go to use the bathroom if you're actually on the call centre team on the desk. So that was quite difficult for people to get away from their desk, because then if there was a problem with their passport, they might be away from their desk for like 20 minutes or something. And also we did have not a lot, but we had a few people who were like, look, when I joined Aviva 30 years ago, I gave you a copy of my passport. Why do you want another copy now? Well, firstly, that passport is out of date.
Yeah.
Secondly, your citizenship could have changed. You could have got married. You could be a dual passport holder. So we did have a handful of people who got very sort of antsy with us. And we did have a few people who totally refused, which we had to elevate that to sort of senior management. And I think when I left, there were about 5 people who were still they would not share their passport or any other form of ID.
That's not that many in the scheme of things. So really good job. Yeah. Really good job rolling that out. Tell me, I imagine as you were going through this big change and discovering people with illegal passports or without the right to work, who else started to get involved from the wider organisation at that point?
Yeah, so obviously that became, we had to bring HR into the discussion then, and we just really handed over the information. Then HR sort of took it from there. But both the people who hadn't had the right to work, obviously, we had to let them go. Yeah, for obvious reasons. So it was a little bit, and the person who had the fraudulent passport, it was all to do with when he was young, and it was very, very emotional for my team member who was dealing with it, because the person was sitting there in tears, and you hadn't expected to have that type of situation. But that was the minority. That was just
of course. It was but it does touch on an important theme. I think often this industry can be amazing, and you're helping people to often achieve an important part of their life, like moving somewhere new. But you often do have to be the bearer of bad news as a global mobility person. How do you try and approach those conversations and support your team through those conversations?
So we try and work around it when it's bad news. I mean, bad news is generally sort of an exception they're asking for, and it's declined. Yeah. So if it's declined, then we try and say, well, have you thought about, sort of doing this another way? I can't really think of an example at the moment, but we're quite pragmatic, I think, certainly in my team in mobility. Yeah. If someone's asking for something and it isn't actually approved through the business, then we try and put in favours with other people. Maybe somebody else who's already transferred to that location and they've had a similar request, and how did they overcome it? So put them in contact with that individual.
I love that. Yeah, just a recurring theme here is being proactive, not being afraid to speak to others as well. Speak to the Workday team to get the report, go to the offices to meet people in person, speak to people who've already moved. It's like, that's how you make things happen ultimately, right?
Yeah, and I think also it's really important when you're moving somebody cross-border. I try and sort of like tie them up with a mentor in the new host location city. Yeah. So, and we run that program at Citibank, and it worked really well. We were allowed then to have sort of like a drinks party maybe because we had about 300 expats in London when I was at Citi. So every sort of 3 or 4 months, we'd hold a drinks party in one of the dining rooms, which, money wasn't an issue then. Yeah. The new guys would all be invited with their spouses and meet with people who've been here for a couple of years. Wow. Who weren't necessarily working for the same business, so they'd never come across them in their normal day-to-day work.
Yeah.
But, an American who's worked in the UK for 2 years, connecting with somebody who's only been here for a couple of months. And it worked really, really well.
Yeah. I'd say that's something that definitely, one thing that has changed is the budget internally to throw drinks parties, probably not necessarily there for lots of companies anymore. But the things that don't necessarily have to cost a lot of money, like connecting people, still incredibly valuable. And I think that hasn't changed really. How people like meeting new people when they move somewhere new, and you can spend so much money on shipping or temporary accommodation, but sometimes a free introduction can be one of the most valuable things you can do.
Absolutely.
Now, what a crazy time. And just on that Brexit piece, just shows like anything can come at you in mobility, right? And there's always things changing, always new things that you didn't expect to deal with that come along and sort of upset the apple cart.
And and now we have to pay, whereas there was freedom of movement previously, and now it costs us, to bring a French person or a Spanish person to work in the UK. Automatically, it's going to cost us 15,000 at the moment just to get the skilled worker visa.
It's insane.
It's ridiculous. So I think it really affects the turnover of the business.
Yeah, for sure. And it's this is obviously quite a UK specific point, but the cost of visas in the UK is mind numbing relative to other markets. It's really crazy, and it does limit the amount of people that companies want to sort of bring in to the UK, truthfully, because it is such a high cost.
Yeah, absolutely.
Viv, I want to go back to cross-border remote work. I'm sure that wasn't necessarily a topic during your first 10 years in the industry, if I was to guess, but it sounds like it's a pretty major part of your role now at ERM.
I'd say it wasn't a topic for the first 35 years.
Okay, no. Do you remember the first sort of cross-border remote work request that you had?
So when I was about to leave Aviva, we were 6 months or so into the pandemic, and we had identified 125 displaced workers.
Yeah.
And then when I joined ERM, I asked the question, do you have anybody who's displaced? Oh, no, we don't have anybody at ERM. Oh, right, okay.
It seems unlikely.
Within about 3 months, I'd identified about 20 people.
Wow.
And about 5 of those were individuals who, when lockdown first was started in March 2020, I think it was.
Yeah.
They'd actually chosen to go back to their family in their original country.
Yeah.
So they weren't working in their contracted country. And when I joined ERM, I identified them probably 6-9 months later that these people were still working.
Yeah.
From home, from mum's house, dad's house, auntie's
wherever.
Whatever. So it to put that right, to sort of look at shadow payrolls, social security agreements, etc. To say that we probably paid out 6 figures is probably underestimating it.
Yeah.
And then we kept finding people as time evolved.
Yeah.
So there was a need to implement a cross-border remote work policy.
Just before we go into that policy, that 6-figure amount, I think there'll be people listening going, well, what is that being spent on? Explain to the community a little bit, like where that money goes, like who is it back paying taxes? What's the sort of cost involved?
So initially we'd go to our global accounting firm and say, look, this person has been, they're on let's say a contract in Ireland and they've been working in Poland for the last 18 months. We had an entity in Poland, so that wasn't an issue. So we could pay. We then got our global accounting firm to look at the 18 payrolls, the 18 months they'd been working in Poland, work out what the shadow payroll for those 18 months would be, work out what the social security position would be. We then have to pay that money over to the Polish tax authorities. We then have to get a refund on the Irish taxes because they weren't obviously living and working in Ireland. They were paying tax and social security in Ireland. And we also had individuals who were working in countries where we didn't have an entity.
Yeah.
So we'd have to set up the entity. So let's say if we didn't have an entity in Poland, we'd have to set up ERM Ireland in Poland. So we'd have to pay our global accounting firm to set up the entity. That's a huge cost.
Exactly.
Pay over all the money, deregister the entity at the end of it. And then you're paying for tax returns in both countries as well.
100%.
And I mean, the first one that we identified, I think it was only last month where that was closed off. Wow. So it's taken 4 years.
That's amazing. We have to, we really have to be careful of the community, right? Because it can seem like a small thing for the individual to go do it, but just the time involved, let alone the cost, is huge in unpicking these things.
And as we know, global accounting firms aren't shy of, sort of clocking up their fees that they're doing for you. Yeah, I think people were paying for each payroll they were looking at, they would charge us £250. So you multiply that by 18 months.
100%. And that's probably another thing that hasn't changed, is that they're still happy to clock up the fees for time.
But you need the advice to be.
You need the advice, exactly. And compliance is a.
And then we spend, thousands on permanent establishment advice. Yeah. Because have we set up a PE by that person, depending on what their job is and what work they're performing, etc.
Yeah.
So we spent an awful lot on PE advice with our global accounting.
Exactly. So expensive business. So you introduced the process. I know you have one of the best processes I've heard of for dealing with cross-border requests. What is it and how does it work?
So we set up. We sort of looked at a few draft processes to start with and a few draft policies. And we reached out and we benchmarked it with our sort of counterparts in the industry. The Expat Academy has a great sort of benchmarking facility. And if you're a member of them, you can ask questions and you get a really good sort of feedback. So we ended up with a policy which allows up to 30 calendar days, which is 20 working days, remote working in a 12-month rolling period. And the criteria that you have to fulfill for that is that you need to have the working rights for the country that you're doing the remote working in. If you don't have the working rights, then if that country allows remote working for non-nationals of that country, we do allow it. So we've set up sort of like a global spreadsheet of all the countries globally where we've had remote work requests and whether remote working is allowed in that country or if it's only allowed for nationals of that country. Yeah. So that's part of the criteria that we factored into our approval process. The individual has to have personal healthcare insurance, private healthcare insurance, which includes repatriation cover in the event something bad happens when they're in the cross-border remote working country. We check the country with international SOS to make sure it's not a high-risk country. Yeah. Because we don't allow remote working in anything that is above medium risk. Obviously, the business has to approve that the individual can remotely work. And generally, they're tagging on a few days after they're going on vacation or staying with family or whatever.
Exactly.
And more recently, so we rolled this out in April last year, and then in December last year, we managed to get the cross-border remote work requests automated in Workday.
Awesome. Tell us how.
So if I want to request leave in Workday, I go in and say I want a week off in May. I submit it to my boss. She reviews it, she approves it, and then it's approved. Yeah. And that's all well and good. So the same works for the cross-border remote work request. The individual goes into Workday, requests the dates for the remote working. There's various criteria they have to fill in, like what days are you on holiday in that location? What number of days do you want to do the remote working? They tick a box to say that they've read all of the statements about getting the checking on the international SOS app to make sure it's not high risk. Yeah, have private health insurance, etc., etc., and that gets submitted to their line manager. Once their line manager approves it, then it gets forwarded to mobility, and we are the last approver in that line.
Nice.
And I would say 98% get approved.
Awesome. And what type of volume are we approximately speaking here?
We can get 6 in a day.
Wow. It's quite a high volume. I think, it's so popular.
And the most difficult thing for us was publishing this, because we haven't got, we've got sort of an intranet, but it isn't an intranet that pops up on your screen when you log on. You've got to go in and find stuff.
Yes.
So we've done a lot of work on going on various, regional HRD calls.
Yeah.
The community calls that the regions have, as well as publishing it on our intranet. So
I love that though.
And now we've got there. I really feel we've got there. I'm sure there's still a few people who don't put requests in.
Yeah.
And we are still catching a few people purely by word of mouth.
Yeah.
Someone might be on the call and might say, "Oh yeah, I'm actually working in Spain today," and that they're on an Irish contract. So after the call, you send them a quick email saying, "Do you know?"
I love that. But I love the sort of technical approach using existing tools. Everyone's going to have a Workday or SuccessFactors or your HRIS. Use that to automate the process, and then don't rely just on putting it in the internet and then being upset when people don't magically find it. Go and find out how to spread the word. But sounds like it's been a huge success if people are adopting it and not just going sort of behind the scenes.
It has been. And when we meet with our mobility peers at seminars and conferences, we talk about the fact how we've automated this on Workday. And we hold a lot of calls with our GM peers where they
exactly.
Can we have a call? Can you just show us exactly what it looks like in Workday?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm sure you'll have a few more after this comes out, because a lot of people are jealous of that or doing it manually still. And that's a magical process. So well done. Even after 35 years, you found a new way to innovate, Viv, which is very impressive. Let's go to all of that experience you have. People are moving across borders, things go wrong the whole time, or there's strange situations. What's like the weirdest or funniest relocation story you've seen in your time?
But I think for me, it's probably when the shipping company ring you and say, "Look, we're at the house. This person has asked for, can we do it?" So I've had a couple of really odd ones when I was at Citibank. We were moving somebody back to Germany, and the guys were there packing the household goods. They'd done the survey and everything was fine, and went there on the day to start packing. And he had a cage, like a bird cage, which was closed, and there was nothing in the bird cage. But he told the packers that there was a spirit in there, so they mustn't open the bird cage. They had to pack it in a specific box. And this particular person also had a tree trunk in his living room, which looked like something you cut down in your garden. But again, he needed a specific packing case. So it cost us a fortune to ship this bark of this tree.
That's a tricky one. But what did you say? You were like, yeah.
No, he was
senior.
At that point in time, yes, because it's like whatever he wanted, he did. So, and then I had the other situation, in the days of quarantine regulations before the pets got microchipped, etc. We had this budgie come over with one of our American families, and they didn't want it to go into quarantine. So it was agreed that the budgie could stay at the house, and the Ministry of whoever it was who the quarantine side of it would come every week to take stool samples. So we had to pay every week to make sure that this budget wasn't rabies or anything.
That's crazy.
I had somebody who took a ferret on the plane with them.
On the plane?
On the plane. Put the ferret in his jacket, but it managed to get out down the aisle in the plane.
How did you find out about that?
When he got arrested, when he got kidnapped.
Oh dear. That is not good. So lessons, tell people not to take their pets on the plane. Ideally, transferring spirits sounds like a new service line that we'll have to introduce at some point.
And in the days where we've never paid to wherever, I think most moving household goods policies don't pay to ship alcohol because the duty is horrendous on them. And I had a guy come over from Madrid, and he must have had 6 bottles of every single liqueur.
Yeah.
and the duty was almost £10,000. And he had
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, he wasn't happy.
I'm not surprised. But
And he was told not to ship it.
yeah.
I can't remember at that time. I think I had a very difficult conversation with our shippers as well, because they knew that the duty on the alcohol was for the individual's own expense. So they should have really called me when they had these, 30 boxes of spirits. So.
Yeah, that's the hard situation. Is where there's going to be problems just a little bit down the line. You really want to have that caught early so you can manage expectations and not.
No, I've had a container full of firearms come in from Argentina, so it's got compounded as soon as it's arrived. And had the conversation with the guy before he left Argentina, saying, "Do not, you need licenses, you need people." A lovely guy, but he chose to ignore me. So we had to keep him in temporary living for 3 months until all of the firearms. Well, actually, they had to take the chambers out so they couldn't fire.
Wow, crazy! If we're going to have to do another podcast one day, I'm just diving into all of these stories because it's just people. Even if you tell them, sometimes they just won't always listen, or they'll try and bend the rules slightly. It's all part of the fun of the industry. Thank you so much, Viv, being so generous, not only with your time but with your stories. I can't think of a time where we've had more knowledge shared in such a short space of time, and we're definitely going to have you back on to dig into some of these stories more in the future. Thank you so much for coming on.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Cheers, Viv. Speak to you very soon.
Okay, take care.